Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom O'Leary from O'Leary Associates Training Consultancy based here in Tralee in Kerry. I hope you're all well. Apologies I'm not there in person or virtually or live this evening. Unfortunately, this clashed with another workshop we're doing that we scheduled a number of months back. So I asked John Hassett would it be okay if I record this presentation for you this evening. So I was speaking to John there a few weeks back. He asked me to give a talk on sustainability for local groups and social enterprises. And I suppose, given the last 2 years have been fairly, traumatic for everyone in terms of working in the community and sector, I said no problem. This would be something I'd love to do because we've worked a lot with groups over the last 2 years in terms of how they could survive, how they could keep the show on the road in terms of the services they're providing, facilities they're providing. And in fairness, an awful lot of those organisations did, and did very well. They obviously struggled, but they're kind of now at the other side, and things are starting to pick up again, which is great. So this presentation is split into two sections. The first is looking at reviewing, I suppose, where you're at as an organisation, and looking at, taking stock of where things are at, and looking ahead and planning ahead. And then the second part of the session this evening, or the presentation this evening, is looking at the whole funding model. In terms of going forward, how you implement your strategy, how you implement your plans, now that we're kind of out the other side of COVID, hopefully. So the first thing I'm going to talk about this morning or today is looking at, I suppose, reviewing and looking forward. So a lot of organizations I work with are kind of, had to rethink the way they're operating and can change quickly to kind of adjust to the issues that came up because of COVID and the pandemic and social distancing and everything that went along with that over the last number of years. But I'm a great believer of not trying to rewind back to where we were back early 2020 before COVID and see, can we go back to where we were at? It's now an opportunity to actually kind of rethink the way we operate and to look forward. Look forward, I suppose, in confidence that we can make a difference and we can do some, make some changes to the way we operate and maybe operate a bit better and look at how we can support our communities more, know that they need part of your support even more so after COVID. So it's really important to sit down and kind of look at, where we're going with our organisation. So before that, I want to just kind of quickly go through what I think sustainability means. So a lot of people look at sustainability and think, it's all about money and about finance and how do we keep money coming in to keep, cover money going out. And that's a big part of it, absolutely. But it's also more than just that. So first thing we look at is demand. Has the need for the services changed? Or the facilities or support you're providing, have they changed in the last 2 years? Has people's needs changed? Do they require more from you as an organization? Do they need more supports? Or has their needs actually completely changed that they no longer need as much support from your organization? So it's important to look at the demand and how strong that demand is, because that ultimately will lead to how you look for supports and funding and help to meet that demand and to meet those needs of the community that you're operating in. The second thing is looking at people. So if you don't have people, you don't have anything. So you need to look at how much resources do we need to implement our plans and to do the work on the ground. So looking at our management structures or governance structures or voluntary committees or voluntary boards, are they fit for purpose now? Do we need to expand those? Do we need to get new people involved, freshen things up a bit? Have we seen a drop off in volunteers? Do we need to recruit more volunteers? And where are we at in terms of getting more volunteers on board, which is a huge issue across the country for a lot of organisations. Volunteer burnout was huge before COVID, and it certainly was impacted by COVID as well. And then finally, staff. If you've got paid staff members or employees, again, what's the position with them now in terms of post-COVID, in terms of salary costs and supports and grants and supports for those staff, or have those staff moved on to other jobs? Are they working remotely? How does all that work? So it's really important to look at how you sustain the people within your organisation. And then the last one, which is again the most important one for a lot of people, is the financial side of things. So what sort of resources do you require to cover your overheads, keep money coming in, cover the money going out to pay the bills, and then looking at project development in terms of what new projects do you want to implement, or have you planned to implement. Your building projects, renovation projects, buying equipment, delivering new services, or developing new projects, and what's that going to cost. And then finally, look at your reserves targets. So, I know you're not-for-profit companies or not-for-profit organizations or not-for-profit groups, but you're also not for loss. You have to look at how we can generate additional income each year that's going to create a reserve that will allow us as an organization to reinvest back into what we do, to look at, if we need matching funds for projects down the line, that we have that. If there's another, problem that we can't control and funding is reduced, or our supports are reduced, how do we keep the show on the road with having reserves in our account? So that's what I mean by sustainability: demand, people, and money. So really, it's time for reflection and review. So we've been working a lot with groups over the last while, and we kind of say to them, okay, now is the time to review everything. So sit back, think about what you're at, think about what you're doing, see is it fit for purpose, and just reflect on everything really. So a lot of organizations, both not-for-profit organizations and for-profit organizations, were forced into rethinking the way they operate and looking at what they're doing. And this is it's a good opportunity for you to do something similar. Even though you are at the start of, we're not at the start of the year, we're into February now, but it's still early enough to look at, what should we do now over the next 12 months now that we know where we're at. So in our experience, I suppose, with organizations over the last 2 years, and our kind of, I suppose, non-kind of scientific surveys we've done, just looking at talking to groups we work with and just listening to what they say. Some saw funding increases, so some organizations actually increased their funding over the last 2 years because of additional grants, online fundraising they want to develop, and they saw money coming in at a greater rate than previous years. Some saw funding decrease, so they saw a drop off in their funding, fundraising particularly, which impacted on the service they can provide. And then others, unfortunately, saw a complete drop off in funding and are really struggling now, or in some cases won't reopen. In terms of volunteers and support, again, some have lost volunteers because, again, social distancing. Volunteers were slow to come back in to get involved. A lot of volunteers were providing practical kind of supports to organizations doing the work on the ground. That was gone because of they obviously were working remotely in their own businesses, but they couldn't volunteer remotely because some of the centres, for example, were shut down, so they weren't actually getting involved. Because they weren't involved, they weren't coming back. Then in other situations, some groups have increased their volunteers because a lot of people were out of work, had time on their hands, the kids were off school, and they want to do something, keep themselves active, and they started volunteering, getting involved in their local clubs or groups, virtually. So again, we've seen in our own club that I'm involved with, a lot of people came on board to look at kind of help around planning and things like that. So what are the positives that we can take from COVID? And there is positives out there. You can't be looking back thinking God, it was a disaster and everything is really bad, and I don't operate that way. You got to look at in terms of thinking forward, in terms of, okay, what are the positives we can take from this? And there was some positives. Force groups into reevaluating, and the word forced is deliberately used here. So force groups into reevaluating what they did. So a lot of organizations weren't planning, they weren't looking at their long-term plan, they weren't looking at their annual plans, they were just plodding along doing the same thing time and time again. They weren't being innovative, they weren't looking at their fundraising models, nothing like that. So it forced them to reevaluating what they did. It forced them to planning, to look at planning at long last in terms of things are looking good, we need to do something about it, we need to have a plan, and that forced them to doing that. That was a good thing because it got groups looking at what they're doing, and actually now they're operating a lot better, a lot more effectively, a lot more efficiently than they were before COVID. It made groups rethink their fundraising models. Again, they were constantly relying on grants, subsidy, looking at the same sort of fundraisers every year, the golf classic, the flag days, the church cake collection, the cake sales, this kind of stuff. And they were happy enough with that, but they weren't maximizing their potential in terms of fundraising. COVID knocked all that on its head because they were all physical meeting people type events, and that you couldn't do. So they need to think about, okay, how do we do this without meeting people? So it opened up new opportunities for online fundraising. Some embraced it, hugely. Others ignored it and refused to get involved in it and shut down the doors until we're allowed to go back out and open up again. But as I said, online fundraising became a huge opportunity for groups. And then new funding streams. So there was a lot of grants out there the last number of years, 2 years, in response to COVID. So the government kind of opened the purse strings and said, okay, right, we're going to have to help organizations out here. let's start adding more grant packages on board, or let's start adding to our existing packages, and let's have COVID response type funding available for groups to avail of. And a lot of groups literally milked that and managed to secure an awful lot of funding over the last 3 years in those small little grants that were available. But they were all once off, they were all related to COVID, and now that we're out the other side nearly, you can't be reliant on them long term, because they're eventually going to stop as COVID eventually, hopefully goes away. So what we would say then in terms of being positive, re-engage your community as well. A lot of organizations kind of lost contact with their community over the last 2 years. They weren't really engaging because, for example, it might be physical premises you operate, like a community center or an enterprise center or a sports club, and people weren't coming to your premises, so therefore they weren't engaging with you. Others, went online, started doing social media posts, blog posts, video calls, Zoom calls, training was provided online for people, for communities, and they try and engage in a different way. So now that we're kind of back on the other side of this, you can look at, say, okay, let people know you're still there. Let people know you're back, you're stronger than ever. Ask people how you can support them. So go out there and say, okay, look, we're back, we're open. What do you need from us? How can we support you? How can we help you? Communicate with your funders. Very, very important. Let your funders know we're still here. We still need money. We're still doing things. We're looking at our plan. We're looking at keeping going, and we need your help, and we need your support, we need your funding for this. Talk to your sponsors if you have sponsors. Again, looking at your businesses locally, get them back involved. They were involved before. And communicate with your stakeholders. So your local authority, your local development company, Ballyhora, your local businesses in the area, any government department that you've been dealing with in the past. Let them know we're back and we're ready to continue on here. Okay, so hopefully you are engaging at some level with funders, with the community, with your stakeholders over the last 2 years. If you weren't, it's not great, but if you weren't, don't worry about it now, because you need to start engaging with them now at this stage. Really, really important that you re-engage with your community, and that's really, really important. How to do that? Email your stakeholders, your departments, local development company, local authority, anyone you're dealing with that can support you. Email them, outline what you're trying to do, what you're going to be doing. Look at your community notes. Put up an article there about, we're reopened for business, we're back on doing our tie towns again, we're back doing our collections again, whatever it is, just let people know that you're back. Press releases in local papers, local advertisers. Again, doing kind of a launch, kind of a relaunch where we're open again. Similar to the way business was shut down for 2 years and then they kind of relaunched and reopened to let people know they were open for business again. Same with community volunteer organizations. Social media, so your social media platforms, your Facebooks, your Instagrams, your Twitters, your LinkedIn's, whatever social media platform you're on, again, use that to get the message out there. If you have a website, again, front page, your homepage, your website should be, we're back type of message. Local radio, do interviews, and then do surveys. So do a survey of your local community, find out what their needs are now, post-COVID, and respond to those needs and say, okay, well, look, we want to know what you need, and we do our very best in terms of putting in actions and projects that will now meet your new needs. So you're just basically telling them, look, that we're back there supporting them, and we need their support as well in terms of volunteers, in terms of funding. Okay, do an organizational review. So again, look at your internal review. Your structures, have they changed? Have people left your organization in terms of board, committee members? Do you need to add to those structures? Look at your services, your facilities, your supports. Have they changed? Have the needs changed? Need to do something different? Look at your costs that are involved, and your ongoing costs, which are increasing across the board. As we know, like utility costs have gone up, they've gone crazy. How do we start looking at reducing those costs down? How do we look at bringing in funding to cover those costs? Look at your funding models. So again, does that need to be reviewed in terms of how you bring money in to your organization? Do an external review. So again, look at the needs of the community. What we need to do differently now that things have changed. How has COVID influenced the way we operate, for good or for bad? And then most importantly, what's happening at a local level or national level in terms of strategy. So what's government's policy? What's the local authorities' policy in relation to, say, rural development, supporting marginalized groups, supporting disadvantaged, supporting facilities and infrastructure in rural areas. Look at what the policies are nationally. So look at our Rural Future Rural Development Plan, look at the County Development Plan, look at those policies and strategic documents and see, okay, how does our project or our strategy and what we're trying to do align to those. It's very, very important. All funding applications now would need to show how your projects are aligned to national policy. So you need to see what's happening at national level to see how we can now tweak our projects to suit, those policies and those strategies. So what are priorities? So once you do a review process, and any company or organization does a review, the reason you do a review and analysis is to see where you're at and to see, okay, going forward, what do we need to start prioritizing here? So what are our priorities going forward? What's our strategy? Has that changed at all? Are we just going to go back to the same thing again, or should we do something differently? What are our main objectives over the next 6 months? Because it's really important you look at the next 6 months in terms of survival or getting back on track, and the next 12 months, so between now and the end of 2022. And then look at your next 3 years. So like you should be looking at a 1 to 3 year plan. Every organization should be looking long term, because you're looking at, say, projects or funding streams. That's kind of you're looking at in terms of a time frame. But it's really important you have a 6 months plan at the very least anyway, starting out. Look at what's practical and what's achievable. Don't be trying to do things that you're not going to achieve. Pick winnable projects. You're trying to get back on your feet again. The last thing you want to do is take on a large project that's might work or probably won't work. And that's going to just basically soul destroying for everyone involved. And it's going to be, you need to get the community back and support you as well. So start looking at winnable, achievable projects starting off with, and then you can start looking at the larger, more difficult projects later on. Because you need to start, walking again before you start running again. So it's kind of, we walk into a standstill, and now we got to get back on track, and that needs to be done in kind of a very kind of, slow as it goes kind of way. Otherwise, you're going to just take on too much and you're going to get burnt out. And again, what would meet the needs of our communities? What can we do that's going to meet the needs of our community? If you don't know what the needs are, go back to what we talked about earlier on in terms of talk to your community, do your surveys, engage with your community, and find out what can we do differently here, what's changed. I'm a great believer of doing simple action plans. So, even though we do business plans, strategic plans, and feasibility studies, there's no need to be doing detailed, very detailed business plans at this stage or very detailed strategic plans. That's just the thought of doing that. Now for a lot of organizations would just put people off and they won't do it. Just do a simple 1-page action plan and stick to it. So the action plan I use is the one in front of us here. It's a very simple table. The actions, what are we going to do? Who's going to do the action? Who's responsible? When will it be started? When will it be completed? What will it cost? Where we get funding to cover the costs? And what difference will it make? So looking at the impacts. What's the impact of the work we want to do? What's the impact of these projects? Okay, so it's a very simple action plan that you need to look at now in terms of what we need to do over the next 6 months. Who's going to do it? When are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? What's going to cost? Where can we get it funded? Okay, no need for 40-page business plan or strategic plan. Literally use this as a simple planning tool starting out and get back on track again. Okay, so the second part of the presentation this evening is looking at that action plan and looking at what you need to do based on the review and say, okay, well, how do we implement this? How do we go out there and start again? Or, a lot of you might have stopped at all over the last 2 years, but you might have slowed down. So how do we bring it back to the level we're at, back in 2020, back in 2019? Okay, so the two things we look at is one is human resources and how can we expand on that, and then secondly is looking at finance. So the first one is volunteers, and like the backbone of the community volunteer sector is volunteers, and volunteering has took a bit of a hit in the last 2 years because people couldn't meet, they couldn't get out and about and do what they normally do, so they kind of dropped off their volunteer work because they just they couldn't do the work they were supposed to be doing on the ground because things were closed. So what we look at trying to do is now that we're again starting kind of fresh is look at, can we bring on new board members, committee members? Can we add to our skills base? Can we add to our experience base? And can we bring in key people to help us with our projects going forward? How do we recruit new volunteers? How do we get new volunteers on board? As I said, some volunteers got on board and got involved in projects during COVID because they were looking for other things to do. But in a lot of cases, volunteers dropped off because they just weren't getting involved anymore. They had no reason to be kind of getting involved because there was nothing being done. So a key question we get asked a lot by the organizations we work with, whether it be on training or whether it be just meetings I have with people, is saying, okay, how do we bring more people on board? How do we target new volunteers? How do we target new board members? The key thing, and this is probably the most important thing, is that if you approach someone and say, can you volunteer with our organization? They'll probably run as fast as they possibly can run away from you because they're thinking lots of meetings, lots of time, lots of talking, lots of fundraising, lots of work. That's what they're going to be thinking, okay? Whereas you go to them and say, okay, well, we want to get you involved on a specific project where you can utilize your specific skills or your experience or your interests, and we don't want you to get involved in anything else. So you're not going to be going to those meetings. You're not going to be getting involved in the fundraising. You're not going to get involved in this, that, and the other. Okay, that's really important. So when I joined our local club here because my two sons were playing soccer with them, and I was a parent standing on the sideline and thought, I kind of felt bad and said, okay, I'm going to help out here. I'm not a good coach, but I said I'd help out with the training. So I did. I got involved in coaching. They knew that I worked in what I do as a living, so for a living in terms of doing plans and development plans and funding applications. And they asked me to get involved in their field development committee. So we're trying to fundraise for a full-size AstroTurf pitch, and they asked me to get involved. But I said to them, I'm not going to get involved in the actual fundraising part of it. I'll just get involved in the development plan and the grant applications. That's all I'll get involved with, and that was fine. So I don't do the fundraising. I haven't organized Golf Classic. I haven't gone out and sold tickets for different events. I just do my specific thing, and I'm happy out doing that. But I'm contributing to the club, enormously, but I'm not getting involved in lots of other different things. So go out there and focus on specific projects for specific people, okay? If they like what you're doing, if they like the work they're doing, and they like being part of the organization, they'll stay involved and get involved in other things. But make sure that they're not asked to do loads of different things. Attract people with specific skills, interest, and experience. You need to strengthen your boards. You need to go out there and find people with say, different skills. And all those skills vary depending on what you're doing. We would always encourage every board to have someone with some sort of legal background, business background, finance background. If it's a project you're developing, like say a capital project, a building project, identify someone who's got say architectural skills or engineering skills, quantity surveyor, or project management skills, because they will support you with your project going forward. Be very clear on their roles, okay? Very important. We work with an organization here in Kerry. They provide cancer supports for people recovering from cancer, and they've got departments for their volunteers. So they have a garden maintenance department, and those volunteers don't want to get involved in counselling. They don't want to get involved in listing services. They don't want to get involved in the actual working directly with their client bases, but they want to help out and they want to get involved in the organisation. A lot of them are avid gardeners or retired, and they just like working in gardens, and they maintain the garden, and that's all they do. And then you've other people who volunteer in counselling, listening, or doing admin roles, but they're not asked to one day do counselling, nor they do fundraising, or they go out and weed the garden. They're very specific roles, and they're happy within those roles. Very important. Make sure you give them job descriptions, and you stick to those job descriptions. A lot of volunteers are asked to do everything, and they get burnt out. Make sure you provide supports like training supports that they might need. Give them an induction into the organization so they're clear in terms of what you do and what they can help you do. And make sure that there's very clear direction given to them in terms of what their role is within the organization. Develop volunteer policies to protect yourself and protect them. Again, there's a lot of policies online. Talk to your volunteer centres. They will give you a kind of guidelines in terms of how to do up the policy, but it's really important that you have policies around your volunteers, same way that you would have around staff. Things like health and safety, confidentiality, insurance, very, very important. Most importantly, reward and thank your volunteers. Not so you pay them, because you can pay them in some cases. You can reward them though in other ways, and you can certainly say thank you in lots of different ways. I like to kind of work with organisations who do kind of annual events for their volunteers. It might be Christmas dinner, it might be barbecue, something that's fun, social event. But it's a kind of way of them saying thank you for the work they're doing and the support they're providing throughout the year. Really, really important. But going back to it, identify people with specific interests and get them involved because of those interests. Don't ask them to do loads at the start. Don't kind of overwhelm them with kind of a workload when you're asking them to volunteer. Get them involved because they want to be involved, not because they feel they have to be involved. Finance, again, review your costs regularly. Hugely important now that you start looking at your operational costs and see how you can reduce those down. A lot of work is being done at the moment around kind of energy audits for buildings, for older buildings, see how they can reduce their overheads. So they're replacing lights with LED lights, they're looking at their heating systems, looking at insulation. Obviously, there's going to be grants coming on board with SAEI for that, but it's something to look at. Start negotiating your costs with your suppliers and see can you reduce them in any way you possibly can. But look, things are happening where costs are increasing, we can't really do anything about that. So it's important you look at how you bring in money to cover those costs. If you look at new projects like renovation works, building works, equipment, services that you're getting on board or whatever it might be, again, look at where grant they might be available for those. The grants, sector, let's say, for new capital projects is limited at the moment because LEADER is in kind of in transition funding, as you might be aware. but there will be a new leader program kicking off in the next year or two, so there will be funding back on stream again. There's also other capital funding that you could look at, but again, just be careful, because again, building costs are going crazy, and the cost of doing a project now compared to, say, 12 months ago, in a lot of cases, gone up by 30 or 40%. So just be careful when you're starting to look at projects that you can actually finance those projects going forward before you even start the planning phase of them. Then review your existing fundraising models. So look at your fee structure. Really important to look at what sort of fees you can bring in from your organization, what you can charge. Can you charge for anything? Look at the grants. So again, the type of grants are out there. Look at your fundraising. Look at your sponsors. The grants, I would recommend putting together a database of available grants. So if you go on fundingpoint.ie or activelink.ie, that's got a list of all the grants that are open currently. Make a list of what's relevant to you, what's not relevant to you, and see if it's something you should apply for. Again, get a mailing list with government departments or your Ballyhora. When grants are made available, they notify you of when grants are out there. Look at Publi's website, because they have different grant supports that they have constantly. Community Foundation of Ireland again administer different grants, like the moment they're doing the toy show appeal from RTE, that grant package. They've done comic relief package, and a number of different grants that they administer throughout the years. Keep an eye on their website. Same with Rethink Ireland. Again, manage different number of grant packages, see what's relevant to yourselves, and apply for those that are relevant to the projects that you want to start off. Your online fundraising, absolutely hugely important now. Has been for the last 2 years, but it's a great opportunity to start moving your fundraising online. Not so you drop everything else you're doing, but certainly look at online fundraising as the way forward. If you have a website, look at getting one built and using that to kind of provide information about your organization, the work you do, using video content, using testimonials. It's a great way of giving information to your stakeholders as well. Or if you're looking for grants, directing people to your website gives an awful information about your organization. Very transparent, very accountable. Social media, if you've got any social media platforms, if you don't, you should have. You can do fundraising through those platforms. Like Facebook have a fundraising page where you can set up your own fundraising through Facebook, or you can look at third-party fundraising platforms. Third-party fundraising platforms like GoFundMe.com, very good way of starting off, fairly easy to do. The only issue I have with them is that you're taking people away from your website, you're taking people away from you, and you can't provide them as much information as you could if they were going directly to your website. Obviously, you pay a commission as well on those third-party fundraising platforms. Not a huge commission, but you do pay a commission on that. So every euro you get, you're going to give a percentage over to the fundraising platform. The advantage of online fundraising is that the biggest advantage, you got more reach. So if you take, say, a backpacking fundraiser in Tesco, for example, or Dunnes Stores or whatever, you're basically going to be relying on the people that are shopping at that particular time, and a percentage of those people might give you money. If you run online, you can target way more people's multiples more, because it could be anyone. You can provide more detail as well. So if you get people back to your website, you can show them a video about the project, you can show them a presentation about the project, you can show them plans for the project. So that project I mentioned a while ago about our own sports club, the soccer club doing the AstroTurf pitch, on our social media platform, there's a video there of an overview of what the pitch will look like when it's completed. And parents are like, oh, that's amazing, it'll be fantastic for our kids. How can we get involved? Because you can see it. If you can't see it, you don't know what's about. So therefore, use things like presentations, really, really important. Not that expensive either to do. The great thing about online platform is that you can target the diaspora, people who were living in your community or in your parish before, who now moved abroad. They can still support you because they can go online and support you. There's less administration involved with online fundraising, because again, you're not there counting coins or notes after the fundraiser. It's all done online, so you get reports from your payment platforms like PayPal or Stripe or whatever it might be that you're using, and you can actually break down those reports to give you a lot more information in terms of where the money's coming from, and break down in terms of dates and all that kind of stuff. It's also more transparent and accountable, because people aren't wondering where that bucket of money's gone to that was collected outside the church on last Sunday, or the check that was handed over after a table quiz or something. It's all online. It's all very transparent and accountable. So it's really important to look at the online fundraising as a way forward, as part of your post-COVID fundraising model. Okay, sponsors and partners, get them involved as well. Go and talk to your companies, how they can support you. In-kind contributions such as their time, equipment, materials they can give you, cash contributions, in terms of money. Look at your, how you can support them, how much you can offer them in return, publicity. They might want to get involved because they're involved in a project anyway, or they might get involved because they're living locally, or their staff is involved in the organization, or whatever it might be. You know, if you can offer them some sort of marketing and PR, absolutely do that if you can. But you know, start tapping into your corporate sector, your local businesses, your large companies that are around, and see can they support you in whatever way they possibly can. Again, rather than doing kind of bit by bit, once every now and again type way, look at, you know, maybe 3-year sponsorship deals with companies. So you tie them in for, you know, 2 or 3 years, in terms of they become they're your main sponsor, and you're their main project over the next 2 years. So it's important that you tie them in. Okay, so wraps up the discussion this evening that I was asked to present to yourselves in terms of sustainability. I suppose the key thing really is, look, we've gone through the last 2 years being kind of you know, difficult for everyone at many different levels, but you know, as always, the kind of volunteer sector in across the country have kind of stepped up to the plate, and you know, tackled things head on, and really have done amazing things, and kind of kept the show on the road over the last 12 months. And that's acknowledged by people like myself working in the sector, and people working in the local development sector and the local authority sector. And it's also, you know, I suppose, acknowledged by government departments and by ministers and civil servants. But it's really important that now you go back and say to people, look, we kind of kept this thing going for the last 2 years. You now need to support us going forward in terms of helping us drive on, and even do things better, and even do things, you know, way better than we did before. And I think it's an opportunity to reflect and look back, but it's also an opportunity to kind of drive on and put your best foot forward, and to avail of the various supports that are going ahead over the next while. But it's really important you stay engaged with your community. So again, thank you for listening, and I wish you the best of luck into the projects tonight are going forward. And again, sorry I couldn't be there this evening in live, but if you have any questions, or after you've listened to this presentation, feel free to contact me by email, and I'll advise you the best I possibly can. So thank you very much, and thank you for Ballyhor as well for inviting me on this evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.